we're going to do our best to try to keep on time with the schedule. And I think for our start-off speaker, we certainly don't want to delay getting to Mark. Briefly, as introduction, Mark is someone I've known for quite a few years. He's had a distinguished career. He was the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, for the state of Colorado for many years, and then was hired away by the state of California as the Chief Information Security Officer. And I met him during that time. There was an award by one of the information security magazines, Community. It's called the Security 7 Award, and Mark was a recipient of that award, and I met him at the ceremony for that in Chicago. I don't think I ever visited you in California, however. So he was in that role for several years, then left and became the Chief Information Security Officer for NERC, which is one of the large energy consortiums. Then was hired away by DHS, a very wise move on the part of the government, which doesn't always make wise moves, as the Deputy Undersecretary for Cyber at DHS. It was then that he actually gave one of our keynotes. We believe it was 2012. I haven't looked back at that. Both Mark and Chris Painter, who was at the State Department, were our speakers that year. And because of the government shutdown, at the last minute, neither could travel here. So both of them managed to work it out to do their keynotes by video for us. So if you were here at that time, they went above and beyond to appear and give really interesting talks that year. But we vowed to have him back. And so after he left DHS, after some other locations, he ended up at vArmour, and he accepted our invitations to come and give the opening keynote in person this time. And with that, someone with great experience, many of you know from the industry, we are very happy to welcome Mark Weatherford here live in person.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you very much. Well, it is good to finally be here. Actually, SPAF has invited me, I don't know, maybe a half dozen times, and every year it seems like something has come up, and for whatever reason I couldn't get here. But I've been working with the staff now for like the last 9 months, and it's been blocked on my calendar. One of the things that SPAF failed to mention on this Security 7 award, he was actually a recipient of the award too. And I can remember thinking at the time, and it's like this list came out of 7 people, and I said, I am on the same list with SPAF. I mean, there's got to be some kind of a mistake here. I mean, I have arrived. And but anyway, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me and for letting me be here today. So I picked this title for this talk several months ago, but a lot of things have changed in the world. And that's one of the problems when you give a lot of talks like this. They always want you to give pick the title and select the abstract and develop your slides 3 months in advance. I changed these slides literally sitting here this morning because stuff happens, and especially in this very dynamic cybersecurity world we're in today. Stuff happens all the time. So I'm going to meander like a stream through a variety of different subjects today, but I am going to stay on time because I have a flight out of Indianapolis at 12:55, and I think I can make it. So let me see if I can figure this out. There we go. So every year, and I know a number of people in the room, you get called by magazines and newspapers and different people say, what are your predictions for 2018, for the next year? And I was just looking through a bunch of these, as I do every year, and seeing what are the predictions for 2018. And these things kind of bubbled up to the top out of the thousands of different things that various people predicted: cloud, blockchain, quantum computing, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and ML. And executive leadership and board of directors responsibilities seem to have bubbled up and been the most important things. And so I'm going to talk about a couple of these today. And I'm going to touch on all of them indirectly. So probably a decade ago, we talked about the 3 V's of data: volume, velocity, and variety. And I think we would all agree that today we're seeing a trend that the data, far from the technical pieces of volume, variety, and velocity, the value of data is what's driving a lot of activity in the cybersecurity business, both on the bad guys side, but certainly on the vendor community side. We're developing products now that address how to protect the value of the data. And I want to touch on this because this is, and I don't want to get into the religious war of Facebook and what Google are doing, but you know, somebody said this a while back, and I think it bears repeating. And that's, if you use a digital product but you aren't paying anything for it, you are the product. So Facebook, Gmail, Google, any of the social media sites that you don't pay anything for, it costs them to run those businesses. So they have to recoup some kind of revenue some way. And they're doing that by selling our data. And way back when, in 2007, when I signed up for Facebook, on that user agreement that I signed, it said that I acknowledged that they were going to do that, just like all of us. So I think I won't say it's disingenuous that people complain about what some of these sites are doing, because I certainly think that, you know, that Facebook, and they have a responsibility probably greater than what they've done. But we also have a responsibility that when we participate in some of these sites to know exactly what it is we're doing. So that's my public service announcement. So we've said this for a number of years, that technology is just outpacing our ability to secure the technology. And when we talk about things like IPv6, which, by the way, I was working on IPv6 back in the mid-90s, and I really never thought it would get off the ground, but now, you know, IoT couldn't exist without IPv6. Virtualization back in 1998 when VMware started, and we thought, wow, this is kind of cool technology. And now today you can't even imagine running a data center with all physical hardware. Cloud, containers, AI, ML, microsegmentation, blockchain, 5G, by the way, have great hopes for 5G that it's going to change the world again. So all of these things, I think, are the reason why security is such a challenge for us. Because as this new technology is coming out, we still aren't building technology or building security into the technology. We are coming in after the fact because the market is driving the technology, but market very, very rarely drives security. A friend of mine told me a long, long time ago that companies buy compliance, they don't buy security. And I think that's still true to a great degree today. So Elon Musk has kind of been on the edges of the AI conversation. He's actually not a proponent of AI, but I think he knows, he can see where it's coming. By the way, if you're not paying attention to what Elon Musk is doing, you need to be paying attention, because this is a smart dude. But on the entirely opposite end of the spectrum, when you have a guy like Vladimir Putin that's talking about AI, again, I think this is an indication that it's something that we need to be paying attention to. These guys are on the opposite ends of the technology spectrum, but they're both talking about the same thing, and honestly, for the same reasons here. So one of my jobs at DHS was not just protecting the civilian federal government, but working with each of the 16 critical infrastructures. Actually, there were 18, consolidated a couple of them 2 years ago, and now there's 16. But if you look at these large segments of society, and you see how technology can be impacting them. It is profound. There is nothing up here, and I'll talk about this in IoT in a little bit. There's nothing up here that is not being profoundly impacted by technology. And many of these industries are not what you would call real technology industries. So the technology is coming along without, in many cases, the industry being prepared for the technology, if that makes any sense at all. And something I do know a lot about now is legislation. Technology is driving an incredible amount of legislation at the federal level and at the state level. I haven't even counted up the state level bills that are associated with security or privacy, but it's a big, big number. But as of yesterday, 223 bills, amendments, and resolutions that either directly address cybersecurity or indirectly address cybersecurity in some part of the bill. Now, this is, it can be a good thing, but legislators are not real technical for the most part. In fact, very few of them understand technology, which is why some of us actually spend a lot of time trying to educate legislators, because I worry about the unintended consequences that happen when legislators write some of these bills that really can impact not just businesses, but society as a whole. So it's all of our responsibility to make sure our legislators are educated, and we have to be proactively helping them. And I always recommend to my colleagues, know who your legislators are, send them a note and say, hey, I know a little bit about this stuff. I'm willing to come and talk to you whenever you have a time to chat. So the other thing it's doing, and it's good for all of us in this room, I assume everyone in here is a cybersecurity professional, it has created a lot of opportunities. I have more opportunities to speak to boards of directors and CEOs today than my calendar will allow me to do. And not because I'm smart, by the way, just because they're not smart. And they're grasping at straws. They need help. They need people to help them understand what it is that they need to be thinking about. I get a lot of requests from boards wanting me to come and validate to them what their CIO and their CISO are telling them. And I always it's an uncomfortable situation to be in, because I feel like I'm vetting their staff for them. But they just don't know. You know, when you hear the same thing from the same people all the time, it's always good to have that third-party validation. And so I think there's going to be many more opportunities. Just like there's plenty of opportunities in the job market, there's plenty of opportunities to influence businesses and government for those of us that actually understand some of this stuff. So this is the obligatory bad guy slide. You know, we still worry about global nation states, international organized crime, terrorists, and hacktivists. But here's the challenge, is that probably up to a decade ago, maybe 20 years ago, but certainly 20 years ago, maybe a decade ago, the business of dealing with foreign governments and foreign militaries and foreign adversaries was the domain of the Department of Defense, the intelligence community. But today, every business, it doesn't matter if you're a Fortune 500 or what I call the unfortunate 5,000, you still have to, you have to deal with all of these different bad guys. And the resources that it require is where the problems come in. Nope. I thought I had it. I changed my slides up, so I'm kind of regrouping here too. But so here's one of the I don't remember where I heard this, but this is an absolutely true statement. that bad guys are compensated by how well they do. And it's a powerful motivator. We do not compensate us. We're not compensated by how well we protect our organization. In fact, we're dinged when we don't protect, when we do have an event. And I think we could go a long way as good guys. We could go a long way with advancing our profession if we figured out a way to change this compensation model. So I still think we approach how to respond to cybersecurity in traditional conflict, the traditional conflict arena, but they simply do not work. General Mike Hayden said, I have to get this quote right. He said, God made the air, land, sea, space domains. Man made the cyber domain, and God did a better job. And I think when we start thinking of conflict, we have this man-made domain that we are really still figuring out how we need to protect it, because escalation is not linear. And this is one of the things that I worry about when we start talking about offensive cybersecurity. You know, you can go from 0 to 90 in the click of a mouse, and you can't pull that back. So when escalation was kind of a linear path, and we had discussions, we had ambassadors doing, working with foreign governments and having conversations about how to respond to these different things. That was kind of a linear progression. We don't have that in cyber. And I really worry that we're going to go from calm to war with the click of a mouse. Deterrence assumes some sense of rationality on the part of the adversary. And we know today that that's not, in fact, true. We have a lot of adversaries that are very irrational. And quite frankly, they would kick the daylights out of civilization given the chance to do it. Cyber domain is an independent landscape where geography is both irrelevant and it's an advantage to the adversary. It's difficult to differentiate. We've said this for a long time. A bad guy with a laptop and Wi-Fi access can look just exactly like a nation state. And we still have trouble with the attribution part of that. And then finally, a noisy attacker doesn't matter if no one's listening. We have to be getting better about instrumenting and receiving and looking at the telemetry to understand what bad guys are doing. So, as Spath mentioned, I spent a bit of time in the electricity industry, which is it could not be more different than the IT industry. In the control system space, availability is everything. In the IT space, integrity and confidentiality are everything. But a lot of organizations are still organized by these silos: physical security, IT security, OT security. But unfortunately, attackers don't think that way. And probably many of you know people and companies, but if I can get into one part of an organization, I am almost 100% guaranteed that I can find my way into the physical security arena or the OT arena. We still talk about this mythical air gap between these different environments, and it is mythology. It does not exist today. This is I know this is an eye chart and you can't even read this, but it's just for context. Momentum Partners are a firm out in Silicon Valley. They put this together. There are 18 different domains on here, and there's 400 different companies on here. This is the challenge that security professionals, that CISOs, are presented with today. If I want to go out and I want to buy an identity and access management solution, I probably have 100 different companies that I have to review and look at their technology and do proof of concepts, and nobody has time to do that. This is a huge, huge problem for the security community. There's simply too much snake oil out there because most of these companies are simply doing what somebody else is doing and calling it something different. I put this up because this is the challenge that a CISO and a security organization with is faced every single day. There's too much noise out there in the space. And Jeremiah Grossman said this a while back. We were talking about this earlier this morning. 20 years ago, we were kind of defensive in our as a security professional. We were defensive in our protecting our organization, making sure our systems were patched. We're making sure our antivirus was up to date. We're making sure that we're doing all those kinds of things. But this has really changed today. I mean, we're still doing all of that stuff. But today, we really have to we spend a lot of time trying to get in the heads of the bad guys. What are they thinking about? What are they doing? Where are they going to go next? And honestly, it requires a different skill. It requires a different, certainly, when I grew up, I did not have that skill. Today, we have to train people differently to think like an analyst and able to discern those different nuances that the adversary is doing. And by the way, they use a lot of our same technology against us. We've known this for a long time, that the security tools that we use for good can be turned around against us and used for evil just as easily. Some of you guys know Rob Joyce. He was the chief of the Tactical Action Office at NSA for several years. And these guys are the real deal. I mean, TAO, they're the ones that are really doing the super cool, spoofy cybersecurity stuff. Rob is now the cybersecurity advisor to the president. And the good thing about Rob is, I mean, this is a guy who's actually done this stuff. So when he talks, it's not just theoretical. And he gave this talk, and by the way, this is on YouTube somewhere. But he said, this was, I think last year, he said, if you really want to protect your network, you have to know your network. We put the time in to know the network better than the people who designed it and run it. The fact that you don't know your network is a huge vulnerability. Well-run networks make our job hard. So he said this essentially talking about foreign governments or adversaries that they were targeting. But guess what? The bad guys do this. They just, put an adversary's picture down there and a title across the bottom. They're doing the same thing to us. If we don't understand our networks, and we don't, by the way, if we don't understand our networks, it makes their job incredibly easy. I think this may be, by the way, Jeremiah just started a new company. And this is exactly what they're going to do. They're going to work on this. This is too simplistic, but it's basically understand what your assets are and where they are, because this has been a problem for us in this business ever since I've been in this business. Understanding what, in fact, we're trying to protect every day, and it's only gotten much harder as technologies as we have virtualized our environment, so we have workloads moving around all over the place. It's become almost impossible to truly understand what our environments look like. So there are thousands and thousands of quotes out there that talk about percentages of this and percentages of that, and we can get lost in numbers. But this caught my eye only because doubling the detection speed of response, it doesn't matter how big of an environment, but doubling anything is to me is attention grabbing. If I can double my ability to do anything, that's worth an investment in my time and money probably. And so I think we've gotten to a place, a technical place, where there are certain pieces of technology that are allowing us to make these huge leaps in our ability to respond. And one of them is the cloud. You remember when we first started talking about the cloud, we thought, what's really different about the cloud than what kind of we've already been doing? Well, maybe 5 years ago, but today the cloud is truly a different beast. And companies like AWS and Microsoft and Google are spending a tremendous amount of money to transform the cloud. I had a friend that called me the other day and said, Microsoft just called me and offered to buy all my data centers from me and then operate them. Like, there's got to be money in it for them to make an offer like that. But so Joe Weinman wrote this book, Cloudonomics, a couple of years ago, probably 5 years ago, 6 years ago. But he said this, I don't know, this one thing that just caught my eye. One thing, I had to go look up who was Schumpeter. And so Joseph Schumpeter was an economist. And he created this concept, he called it creative destruction. It was really about the economy. But this quote, I thought, to me, it just kind of resonated, because what creative destruction says is, in the course of economies changing and growing and shrinking, it's really a messy process. But the cloud is that creative destruction, that really messy process. We're in that, going through that growth of shrinking and expanding and understanding what works and what doesn't work, both from a technology perspective, but from a societal perspective as well. Anyway, I just thought that Schumpeterian creative destruction is an interesting concept. But here's the really beauty of the cloud, is that it is an equalizer. Now, if you're a 5-person startup or a 5,000-person Fortune 500, you have access to the same technology. I can go to Salesforce now, and I can buy all of everything I need to run my business. I can use Dropbox, I can use Salesforce, I can use all of these different things that are out there in the cloud that now make it available to me to be very, very efficient, to be as efficient as a small company as a large company. And I mentioned this earlier, the Fortune 100 and the unfortunate 10,000. See, the Fortune 100, they have all the resources, they have had all of the resources to do the things that the unfortunate 10,000 haven't had to do. In fact, we hear about the Fortune 100 all the time, every day. Those are the ones that they hit the media when they have a data breach or some kind of security incident. But it's happening to the unfortunate 10,000 too. They just don't get the oxygen that the Fortune 100 does. And maybe that's a good thing. It's a good thing for them, but it's not necessarily a good thing, because people, and we were talking about this earlier, people just still don't, people that are not in the business, we live this, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So none of this is a surprise to us. But for most people that don't live this, it is. Because it comes so infrequently to them, and it impacts them so infrequently, it doesn't have the same impact on them that it does to us. So I think that the cloud is a catalyst for better security. And it took me a while to come to this conclusion. But when we think about all of the advantages of the cloud, now it certainly has disadvantages too. Misconfigured S3 buckets is a huge problem still. But we think about it from a big perspective. Decreases the physical footprint, less dependency on legacy technologies, better visibility and software segmentation. Cloud providers are highly, highly, highly incentivized to not have a data breach. You know, if your company has a data breach or a security incident, it affects your company. If Google Cloud has a data breach, it probably affects thousands or 10,000 of companies. And by the way, Google has like 800 security engineers on staff. You know, most companies don't have the resources to go out and do that. Lower cost, more flexible and redundant. OpEx and CapEx. So this is something that CIOs tell me all the time is they literally have a gun to their head to decrease their operational expenditures. There's no more money to go out and spend $50 million on a new data center. How can we do this cheaper? And CapEx is the way we can do that. Or excuse me, opposite, backward. I know some of you saw this. Wendy Nather said this a couple of weeks ago, and Ed Amoroso quoted about it, that we've had this challenge to talk about what is the perimeter today. Where is the perimeter today? The perimeter doesn't exist in any form that we used to think of. We used to know that at the edge of at our boundary, we had a perimeter. That doesn't exist any longer. And Wendy quoted this, and I'm going to use it from now on. The perimeter is any place you make an access control decision. And certainly in a virtualized world where you have still have physical appliances in most data centers. Most companies I talk to, and I'm in a cloud company, most companies I talk to say, those servers right there, those are not going anywhere. You know, we're not moving off that physical hardware. But you have physical, private cloud, public cloud, multi-cloud, and with workloads moving back and forth amongst this, understanding where that perimeter is pretty damn important these days. It's a lot more important, in fact, than it used to be. So this is one of the conversations I have with companies all the time, that, especially smaller, unsophisticated companies. They think, well, I'm just going to move everything to AWS and let AWS take care of it. But I can tell you, when you read the terms and conditions of an AWS contract, they are very specific that this is a shared responsibility. You still have responsibility for your stuff. We have responsibility for our stuff. The cloud providers are responsible for protecting the compute for the infrastructure, ensuring the platform is available, providing basic tools. But end users are still responsible for their own stuff. And to put this in context, if a company has a rogue employee that's doing something bad, that is not AWS's responsibility. If a company is constantly being phished or constantly absorbing viruses, that is not AWS's responsibility. So understanding this is really, really important for companies that are making this leap and putting everything out into the cloud. So, Internet of Things. So, I've been to one CES, and I just happened to be at this CES. It's the big show in Las Vegas every January. In 2014, John Chambers, he was the CEO at Cisco at the time, said the Internet of Everything will be 5 to 10 times more impactful in the next decade than the entire Internet has been to date. Now, I can remember when he said this. I had to go back and think, did he just say what I think he said? Because if you think about this, and maybe for an old guy like me that's been around since the beginning of the Internet almost, or maybe not, but a long time. And seeing how the Internet has changed this world today, and anything that could be 5 to 10 times more impactful than that is pretty profound. It's a pretty big deal. And then last year, Eric Schmidt said this, the Internet, specifically around IoT. The Internet will disappear. There will be so many IP addresses, so many devices, sensors, and things that you're wearing, things that you're interacting with, that you won't even sense it. So we've gone from something where TCP/IP was something really concrete that we could understand, to we don't even notice it anymore. That's a pretty big deal. And kind of going back to the slide where I talked about the different critical infrastructures, there's virtually nothing that's not being touched by IoT today. By the way, I use IoT kind of interchangeably, IoT, IOE, IIoT. The internet, the industrial internet, the internet of everything, it touches everything. There's no part of our economy or society today that's not being impacted. We're putting sensors out there like crazy. And Michelle Dennedy's, I don't know, you hear Michelle? She's privacy at Cisco, and she's probably going to talk about this afternoon. This is a huge privacy concern. I mean, we have sensors out there that are literally just cranking out data out into the ether for anybody to collect. There was the guy from Symantec 2 or 3 years ago. He was standing on the side of the road at a marathon in Dublin, Ireland, and he was sniffing Bluetooth stuff. And he collected so much very sensitive information about all the people that were running, you know, from all their Fitbits and all of their wearable devices. And it wasn't just like heart rate and pace. He collected their age, their sex, their login password, their login credentials for some of their devices. I mean, this stuff's just out there. The privacy implications of IoT are something that I don't think we have quite come to grips with yet. But by the way, that other slide I had on what the legislature is doing, they are going to legislate this. And we need to help them with that. So, good old John McAfee. John's a little bit out there on the edge. Okay, he's way out there on the edge. But he's still a really smart guy. And we need to pay attention to it. You know, he said this quote, and I think a lot of people kind of don't give him credibility anymore just because some of the wacky stuff that he's done. But this dude is still pretty smart, and he's trying to be relevant. If he could stay relevant for a period of time without, you know, doing something stupid. But any logical structure that humans can conceive will be susceptible to hacking, and the more complex the structure, the more certain it is that it can be hacked. Guess what? IoT is very, very complex. When you start stringing all this stuff together, it's very, very complex. And then Wolfgang said this, he just tweeted this over the weekend. Some of you probably saw it. And we've seen this over the years. And Spaff, you probably have some metric that you use as well. My rule of thumb, for every 1,000 lines of code, on average, at least one code level bug. For every 20 code level bugs, at least one's a vulnerability. For every 10 vulns, at least one's exploitable. Well, this works out the math there. For every 20 or 200,000 lines of code, there's one exploitable vulnerability. Well, when you have code bases that have, you know, millions and millions of lines of code, guess what? There's a hell of a lot of vulnerabilities in there. And by the way, this hasn't changed. I mean, we've had this problem for decades. So the S in IoT is for security. Okay, you guys got it. You got it faster than some of the people I say that to. Yeah, there is no S. So, you know, there's a whole lot of things that we can talk about with security and IoT. It certainly explodes the attack landscape. Passwords are still weak in their default configuration. I did my graduate work in the early 90s, and I did my thesis on information security. And I can tell you that back in the early 90s, there were only a few people Spaff was talking about security back in the early 90s. In fact, I have to go look. You may be quoted somewhere in my thesis. Because there just weren't that many people talking about it. But I wrote about password security in 1994. And everything I wrote is still the problem we have today. I mean, this is embarrassing to me as a security professional, that in 2018, user IDs and passwords are still our primary form of authentication. That should embarrass all of us. We haven't figured out something better than that. Encryption is difficult. The form factor, the physical platform for most of these sensors is so small, there's just not enough room on them to add code for encryption. So I think somebody really smart out here is going to have to figure that how do we abstract our layer of security for IoT. Security is still not embedded into the software development process. I mean, we could talk about that all day long. Organizational strategic planning is still not happening. And this has been a challenge for us forever. As new technology comes out, we want to get it into production as quickly as we can because it's going to save us money, it's going to make us more efficient. But with IoT, I think our risk is going way, way, way up. And we're not compensating for that with the appropriate level of strategic planning. Certainly, everything as a service it's convenient, but it adds incredible challenges. And then privacy, and I'll let Mickey talk about that later, because I'm sure she's going to. So, you're probably going to talk. I'm not going to talk about. There've been a number of really, really big events over the last couple of years, and these are just 5 of them. Certainly, the Mirai botnet was a huge deal for us. The 1.2 terabytes a botnet was bigger, way bigger than anything we'd ever seen before. But when you think about it, with the billions of IoT devices out there today, unsecured IoT devices, it's not inconceivable that number could be 10 times that. So here's something so Mirai was bad. This is going to be really bad. And this is going to happen. I guarantee you, one of these days, you're going to get your electric bill from the power company, and it's going to be 10 times what it was last month. And you're going to go, what the hell happened? And somebody will have taken over your entire smart home and is using it for crypto mining, which, as we all know, power consumption is the biggest factor in crypto mining. So these guys are looking wherever they can go to find it, to find power. And again, worrying about putting smart technology in the hands of consumers that really don't understand it worries me a lot. So people ask me this all the time. Like we all get this question, what keeps you up at night? What worries you the most? Well, it's not the zombies from The Walking Dead. It's billions and billions of IoT zombies. And how do we go back and retroactively patch these devices once they're out there? We're not. You can't. It's impossible. It won't ever happen. And just like with Meltdown Inspector, we're going to have to get through this life cycle replacement in order to, I think, fix these things. That's why we need to be building the technology, building the security into the technology. And the decisions need to be made today. So, I'm an optimist. And I think if you're in this business and you're not an optimist, you are not going to last. Because I can tell you, being a CISO, every day you come in and you're going to get rear end handed to you for something that's happened, something that you didn't plan on. Every single day that's going to happen. So you have to be optimistic. And I'm optimistic that we have really smart people around the world, many of you in the room, that are developing awesome products, but we are going to innovate our way out of this issue, innovate our way out of the problem. And I think things like blockchain And AI and ML are going to help us do that. And I know you're going to have a number of conversations on those specific things as you go over the next day and a half. So, but we can't wait too long. Everybody knows the little parable about the frog and the water. Put the frog in a pot of cold water and you turn the heat up. Well, the frog just gets acclimated to the water and acclimated to the water, and the water gets hotter and hotter. And before the frog knows it, he's boiled up. And I feel like that's kind of where we are in security today. The water is getting hot. And we better figure out pretty damn quick that we need to get out of the water. We need to start thinking. We really, really need to start thinking strategically about security and not tactically. We can't stop thinking tactically, but we have to start thinking strategically. I remember, when I was CISO in Colorado, when I was CISO in California, when I was CSO at NERC, I wanted to be strategic. I had a strategic plan. We had strategic meetings once a month, but my day was consumed every day by tactical issues. And this is a leadership and a management thing. It's not a technology thing. We have to get better about being strategic about security. And I will end with Dan Geer's quote. You have not picked a career, you have picked a crusade. But it's a worthy crusade. And be an optimist. So that is it. I think I have a couple minutes if we have any questions. And thank you very much. You took a lot of notes there.
I wanted to push back a smidge on one element of what you said and get your view on it. At one point, you had a bullet on your slide, geography is irrelevant. And of course, I realize that you were making that as a simplistic statement. But something I see from sitting in government is geography is tremendously relevant to my ability to be a defender in terms of how U.S. law places constraints on my actions. And what do you think of that, and what can we do about it?
No. That's a, so obviously you're right. You took a different context of that. Geography is very relevant, and I can tell you, so DOJ just indicted 9 Iranians for hacking. Do you think these guys are staying up awake at night worrying about being indicted by the United States? No. So geography is very, very relevant from that perspective. And I think, God bless Chris Painter, who was at State Department for a number of years, and he was probably the most important person in the federal government working on our behalf with foreign governments every single day to put the kind of protocols and the kind of relationship building in place with foreign governments so that we could react to these kinds of things appropriately. But you're right, absolutely relevant in that context.
I'm Sanjay Narayan from Vancouver Labs. I think you mentioned that complexity is the real culprit here for security, and so I'd like to your views on how we address that. I think the challenge is that, security, abstractly is about some fairly fundamental properties of encryption and access, confidentiality and access control and integrity and all that. But I think the real challenge is how do we know what the requirements are for these things for my enterprise, right? Like even you mentioned the access is about where a perimeter is wherever there is an access decision to be made. But how do I know what those policies should be? What if I'm given a very complex enterprise? How do I know what the access control policy should be in the first place, even in a global sense? What are your views on that? It really boils down to complexity. There are lots of tools, even I guess from your company, that to help me put the access control policies in place, but what are those policies? And it's very difficult to know what those policies are if you have a highly complex organization. So how
Well,
can we
there's-
infer those policies? Can AI help, or I don't know?
So I think there's 1,000 different ways to answer that. I mean, and I would certainly, I think there's no policy that's going to be uniform for all organizations. You know, every, you know, especially around access control, depending on the kind of environment you're in, the kind of product you're making, the kind of customers you have, all impact that in some form or fashion. What I think we have to do, and I'm going to step back, and this is probably not going to answer your question, but when I talk about complexity, I'm fine with complexity for smart people in smart organizations. Where we have a problem is with when consumers and people who are not technically savvy have to implement complex solutions. You know, and again, I'll abstract it even a layer further. When my grandma has to interpret a pop-up box that says, do you want to download something? You know, we have failed as a community. You know, so I think we need to put complexity where it belongs, and that's with technical people in our organization. But we have to take, in my mind, a consumer should never, ever have to make a security decision. Those decisions should be made, you know, at a layer far, far below anything that they have to worry about. They shouldn't have to patch their systems. They shouldn't have to you know, download AV updates. You know, this is stuff that consumers shouldn't have to do. I mean, think about this. If you drove your car like that, we do some today. But you know, historically, if you had to do that, you had to patch everything in your life when something new came out. We couldn't live that way. But we're forcing this on consumers and even on companies. You know, I'm going to go back to my unfortunate 10,000. You know, and probably many of you know, I know a lot of companies still today where the CEO happens to be the IT guy, and just because he's the only person to do it, and you know, the complexity of our tools and our environments, it makes it too difficult for them. I know I probably didn't answer your question.
No, that's fine. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you very much.